folks. My name is John Carvelli, and on behalf of the California State Athletic Commission, I welcome you to our Tuesday, December 17th, 2019 public meeting. Everyone should have a copy of the agenda and the materials been posted and are available in the back of the room. So we'll begin with our number one on our agenda, which is our call to order, which I'm just doing, our Pledge of Allegiance, and then we'll establish our quorum. So let's please stand for our pledge. You'll follow me, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Foster, would you please call the roll so we can establish a quorum?
Yes, sir. Commissioner Iquitos. Commissioner Araby.
Present.
Chairman Carvelli.
Here.
Vice Chair Layman.
Here.
Commissioner and Dr. Williams.
Here.
Commissioner Sauter. Sir, we have 6-0. You have a quorum. Commissioner Ayala is absent.
Thank you. An opportunity, agenda item number 2, to make a couple of opening remarks. There's something that I think was extraordinary that took place in November I'd like to tell you all quickly about. I attended the boxing event at the Staples Center in Los Angeles, where we had two basically celebrities, but actual fighters. We'll talk more about that in a second. KSI, who's a rapper from England, fought Logan Paul, who can best be described as a YouTube celebrity. All I can tell you is that my 14-year-old daughter knew who he was, so that whatever that tells you might be helpful. These gentlemen have fought before. They're trained athletes, they're amateur boxers, and now they've gone pro. And we did talk about this at great length, and we approved a match. It was set for November at Staples Center, and it immediately attracted an amazing amount of attention on social media, which we were looking at. And I have to say, just in kind of in summary, if anyone has any questions, Andy and I were there, and others. Sophie, right? You were there? No, you weren't there for that one. Okay, all right. Trish, yeah, Trish was there. Okay. It was an amazing event, and I think why I feel good about it for a couple of things is, first of all, it was a good match. It was a good fight. I mean, you're not going to see the skill level of of some of the ones that we're used to, but they were skilled enough where they knew how to defend themselves and go after each other. And it was a back and forth fight. And Jack Reese was assigned as the referee, and Andy and I attended the instructions where Jack made it very clear to them about the rules, including the rules that they've ended up violating in the fight. He particularly went over it in detail before the fight, so that there was no question about things like be careful as young fighters, less experienced fighters, no rabbit punches, things like this. So we think it worked out for the best. KSI won the fight, but the final point is it was sold out, right?
Almost sold out.
Close enough to sold out. The place was packed, but packed in a way that was so odd in that people were dressed nicely. They were young people, and they were clapping. It was not the typical fight crowd, but social media celebrities, major celebrities, and it was quite an event that got a lot of good comments from people like, just as an example, Michael Buffer, who said this is great for boxing, to get a whole new generation of people watching boxing, even on social media, as people, younger people are used to doing. So I think it was good. I think it was a job well done by the staff as usual, a good fight, and maybe they'll fight again, who knows. But it was, I think it was a good night for the California State Athletic Commission. Yes, sir.
Just real quickly, I wasn't at the fight, but I did watch it on
Okay.
Zone.
Yeah.
And I thought the media. I thought that the media spin on the telecast was very positive as well. They kind of played up a little bit of controversy with the ending or what have you, but all in all, I was proud that it happened in California. I think it went really well, and everybody they interviewed had positive things to say about the event itself. So I echo what you had to say about that from a distance.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very much. That's good.
I wasn't there, but my great-granddaughter was there. And she said everyone arrived from like 3:30 on, which is unusual, because usually at the regular fights, people don't start sitting down until the main event.
Really sorry. You have to press the white.
It's on.
It's on.
Maybe try your other mic.
Try my other one. How's that? Is that better? I'll sit this way. Is that better?
Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
And yeah, they started clapping from like 3:45 on, which is also really unusual for a fight. And then I did speak with Jack afterwards, and Jack Reese said, yeah, I got some really, not so nice comments, but then I looked and there were like 12. They were 12 years old, so, and they were following up.
Well, we
So
post.
That's okay.
Right, 12 years old. We posted, Martha, a picture on our Instagram page, and I hope you all follow it. But, I think up until this event, we had, I don't know, a couple hundred followers, 300 followers. We had like over 1,000 comments, and now we have a lot more followers. So whatever that means, our job is to promulgate, right? That's one of the things always on our agenda, is we have a responsibility to promote boxing and big events, and I think that we fulfilled that this year. That was, and again, it's not just from entertainment value. It was a good fight. They had good trainers, good seconds. Our inspectors were there, docs were there. Everything was just right, So good, very good. So anyway, wanted you all to hear that. I thought it was a very positive experience for the fighters and the commission. So again, well done to all of you, staff, Andy. Okay, agenda item number 3, approval of the October 15, 2019 commission meeting minutes. I know Mr. Foster gave me a copy that has some last-minute changes, or Sophie, as you did. I gave them to Vice Chair Layman. Have you reviewed them? You okay with that?
I haven't reviewed all
They were
of
just,
yours.
yeah, I'm sorry, I got them out late. I was out of the country, but they're mostly just grammatical. Actually, they are all just grammatical and typo type. But maybe we can just approve them subject to
Okay.
that. There's nothing substantive.
Subject to a review?
Yes, a
Okay.
review of the grammatical.
Okay, so is that your motion
Revisions.
then? We make a motion
Sure.
to
Yes.
approve, subject to review of the last, mostly grammatical changes. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any commissioner comments on the minutes? Staff, any comments on the minutes? Any members of the public would like to comment on our meeting minutes? Seeing none, please call the roll for the vote.
Commissioner Araby,
Aye.
Chairman Carvelli,
Aye?
Vice Chair Layman,
Aye.
Commissioner Sauter, Commissioner Senior Quidez, Commissioner Dr. Williams.
Aye.
6-0, sir.
Thank you. Agenda item number 4, review and approval of the proposed 2020 commission meeting dates and locations. Vice Chair Layman, who is running our agenda, is added this, which I think is a great idea for all of us to take a time to discuss and look at. Do you want to talk about what you're thinking?
Well,
Please.
just the thought about, I love coming here in December, and I love the Christmas tree in the lobby, and the kids are getting ready to sing. But my December's really busy, and I assume other people's are too. So we had the idea of changing our meetings to meet, like, everything pushed up a month, and that's on tab 4. So there would be no December meeting. Our meetings would be February, April, June, September, and November 17th. So hopefully maybe that would be better for other people, because I know a lot of people travel during the winter holidays.
I have a request. Is it possible to even push up the first meeting to like the end of January? The way this is now scheduled, I'm gonna have, I mean, I may be missing a lot of I may be missing a lot of meetings. I'm gonna try not to, but there are 2 of these I'm probably going to be in Africa. Gotta talk to the Tanzania Bar Association.
Ah, the Tanzania Bar Association.
I got a meeting with the Rwanda International Court of Justice, stuff like that. So I was just thinking, there's a Bellator at the end of January, maybe right before that.
What's the date? The problem is that it's already December 15th, Martha.
But if we're tweaking the next year, we're gonna have to be off anyway, And puts us, I mean, it's only 2 weeks off. So the Bellator is what, January 25th? So maybe like the Thursday before, or are we keeping everything Tuesday?
That's 5 weeks from now, though.
Well, as opposed to 7,
The Bellator is in Orange County?
No, it's in LA.
Because February is supposed to be Orange County.
It says Orange County.
Yeah.
I know, but we're all in Southern California anyway, right?
Oh, okay, good point.
I mean, I was just, if it's not possible, it's not possible. I'll just have to.
Well, maybe let's try to tweak that February date, because I'm actually out of the country on the 11th as well, of February.
All right, why don't we work on sending around some other February dates? I don't think it's appropriate to sit here and do that right now.
Yes,
So
sir.
if you could reach out to the commissioners and ask them to respond on some calendar dates, see if, get Martha's travel schedule, get Mary's, and see if we can find something
You're
that works.
just jealous. Just joking.
Okay,
Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
sure.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'll make a trip on purpose now, just for that comment.
You do that.
Come on over.
I'm waiting.
Any
for
other
it.
comments on the other meeting dates? Or is everyone okay with moving November back from December?
December back.
Seeing no objection. I don't know if we need some kind of,
I don't think we need a motion.
now let's keep it so we can make adjustments as we will if we can with the travel schedules for February, okay?
Yes, sir.
You'll follow up, Andy, thank you. Okay. Agenda item number 5, appointments to the members of the Advisory Committee on Medical and Safety Standards. I'm mumbling today, please forgive me. Agenda item number 5.
Mr. Chairman?
Andy,
When you were, one of your first things when you were appointed, sir, was you directed and we developed a procedure, a process on how the MAC it works, and now we're meeting on a fairly regular basis now. But one of the things that we have to do from time to time is the commission has to do is make reappointments or, sometimes bring people off and put new people on. All of the people that I've recommended are already on there. As Dr. Williams can attest, for the most part, these people do attend the meetings. And I've recommended that Dr. Robert Ruelas step in and replace Dr. Gamboa, who's done a good job. He's just, he's very busy. And Dr. Robert Ruelas is a cardiologist from Orange County, fight doctor. I'm sure all of you know him.
Can I ask a question?
any questions? Thank you.
Is there a limit to the number of doctors? I mean, we usually have 6, but
There is some rule.
is there a rule as to the number?
Seem to recall.
I know that there is.
Well, you're looking at, the reason I'm asking is because there's another physician, and not to replace, I know Dr. Ruelas, he's amazing, and I don't know how to maybe do this. If there is no limit, maybe we can add him. If there is a limit, maybe he can just consult if that's possible. But Dr. Maurice Garcia is the director of the transgender department at Cedars-Sinai. And I know we have these issues sometimes, and we've discussed this. He and I've spoken to him, I've met with him, and he is willing to serve on the MAC, but he also has been doing the events to become one of our Ringside physicians, because we've run into issues with our transgender fighters and the transgender issues, and I just think it's a good idea to have somebody who can help us with that. So depending on which way this falls.
Ma'am, I found the code. It's Business Profession Code 18645. It says, there is hereby created within the jurisdiction of the State Athletic Commission Advisory Committee on Medical and Safety Standards. The committee shall consist of 6 licensed physicians and surgeons appointed by the commission.
So can we have him consult then? Is that possible, Ken?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, it's possible to have someone consulting for a particular purpose. They would just not be a regular member of the... Yes, it would be possible to designate someone to consult with the advisory committee for a particular purpose, but the person would not be a regular member of the...
Can we make sure that
Committee.
that's, because I know that one thing we were going to start a small study of our own. We've discussed this, right, Andy? On the female to male, and he was going to help us with that.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. What do you think? Is that okay?
I'm not sure what you're asking, just have him as a consultant?
Right.
I would rather leave that up to the...
Yeah, I think that's
Dr.
fine.
Williams,
Yeah,
Dr. Ross.
yeah. I don't see any problem with that. I think it, would add to some of those discussions, and he could, assist with those particular issues.
So a non-voting member. How about that? So do you want to amend your recommendation? So we re-recommending these 6 people, Andy, and then add Dr. Garcia, is right, Dr. Garcia, as a non-voting member?
I don't
Yes.
think you can do a non-voting member. It doesn't work with the reg.
Just a
The
consultant then?
consultant, yeah.
Okay, as a consultant. Well, then he can just do that by decree, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, so then, do I have a motion to approve the 6 names here before us? Dr. Chair, Dr. Paul Wallace, Brian Estwick, Diego Allende, Ron Duran, Jonathan Schleimer, and Maurice Garcia. No, and, sorry, Robert Rules.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any other commissioner comments? Dr. Williams? would you
The term is 2 years,
4.
4 years?
But the reg just said
Yes.
4.
Okay.
For statute.
Dr. Williams, you okay with this? Liz?
Yes,
Any other
yep,
comments? Okay.
absolutely.
Okay, anything else from staff on this? Members of the public would like to comment on the slate of appointments to the Committee on Medical and Safety Standards. Seeing no members stand to comment, Mr. Foster, please call the roll.
Commissioner Araby,
Aye.
Chairman Carvelli,
Aye.
Vice Chair Layman,
Aye.
Commissioner Sauter, Commissioner Senior Iquitos,
Aye.
Commissioner and Dr. Williams.
Aye.
6-0, sir.
Thank you. Agenda item number 6, discussion and possible action regarding the State Athletic Commission's neurological examination account. Mr. Foster.
Mr. Chairman, this was discussed at our last commission meeting, was asked to be brought back. It's brought back. This is a brain scope. Commissioner and Dr. Williams can explain it much better. We have reached out to the company and requested a quote. I've not got the quote back. But it is, in generalities, it's another tool to help us protect fighters.
Dr. Williams?
Right, yes. So, there's been a big push in the head injury world to look for tools that can be used as biomarkers for head injury, both severe traumatic brain injury, which would include things like bleeding in the brain and what have you, as well as mild traumatic brain injuries or concussion. And this particular device, the BrainScope device, is a really interesting and new technology that's been used over the last several years and has been validated in a number of different scenarios. It's been used by the Department of Defense. It's been used in emergency rooms and also urgent care centers, and it's also been used in a number of concussion centers as well. It's unique in that it provides what's called a multimodal assessment. So this EEG, you can see in some of the paperwork there, there are some electrodes that are placed by way of a disposable EEG unit that looks at brain waves in the brain. And over the course of about 5 minutes, you collect information that can be used in a couple different ways. One is it can predict very accurately the likelihood that there's a bleed in the brain, even with very small bleeds. So you may remember before we had been using the infrascanner, which was another technology from a few years back that could be used to compare different sides of the brain. And if there was a large enough bleed and that bleed was on the surface of the brain, the infrascanner was very accurate in detecting it. This goes a step further and is a little bit more accurate than the infrascanner in that the bleed doesn't have to be on the surface of the brain. It can be deep or surface, and it'll detect smaller volumes of blood. So particularly in this day and age where I'm sure we're going to talk about this a little later, we've all been concerned with, as you mentioned at the last meeting, some of the deaths in boxing. I thought this may be an interesting technology on a number of fronts. One is that it could potentially identify whether there was a high likelihood of blood in the brain very quickly and accurately. Commissioner Iquitos mentioned last meeting that some of these people may come into an event with a small bleed that we don't know about. So there's options to check before a fight, after a fight, and kind of accurately predict whether there's any increased risk of blood in the brain, number one. Number two is that this device will also provide something that they've described as a brain function index, which is a way of looking at kind of the overall health of the brain, again, with that EEG activity. And you can combine that with some other modalities that are done on the handheld. So I think it would be a great addition to our C3 Logics program. And, we've talked about this a little bit at the MAC meetings. At our next MAC meeting, we'll talk about it in more detail. But the technology is one that's been validated. It's been validated and used in a number of different scenarios and environments. I think it would add a significant layer of safety for the athletes, and it could also potentially contribute greatly to our desire to further research and publish information, particularly in this climate of this increased rate of brain deaths in combat sports.
Wow, technology is amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
So how do you envision using this? Like if you have a possible suspected brain injury and you're not sure whether to transport?
So I think
rule out?
that is one scenario. If you have an individual who's had a hard bout or there's some concern by the ringside physician that this person may have suffered some kind of significant brain injury, that would be one scenario or one option in terms of when it's used or when it's deployed. You could, I think, reasonably make the argument to check everybody or maybe check people over a certain age. I mean, there's different options in terms of how it's deployed. But I think that certainly if there's a concern that someone may have suffered, a more significant injury, then they could be checked on site at the venue, and given you can develop a pretty accurate determination as to whether they're likely to have an abnormality on CT scan.
How long does it take to get a reading?
So the EEG portion is about 10 minutes, 5 minutes to place the electrodes and about 5 minutes of EEG activity. So about 10 minutes for that portion. Now, there are other tests that can be done if you decide to. And so the total duration can vary from 10 minutes to 20 or 30 minutes, depending on how many of those things are done. But just the EEG reading is about 10 minutes, which is, pretty amazing that the technology has advanced these to this point. Previously, you would need to have, gel and place caps on. It would take 20 minutes or so to just set somebody up for the EEG. But with these disposable electrodes, it's really made it a lot more easy to acquire the information.
If I could add something, so just for members of the public, we only require MRIs periodically every couple of years, just because of the cost and because of the difficulty. And so the problem sometimes comes in, and we do have weigh-in physicals, but that does not include a scan of the brain. So the problem sometimes comes in where a fighter will come in and maybe they might have fallen down the stairs, or maybe they got into a car accident, or maybe they had a hard spar, or maybe they went to a fight someplace that was unregulated and we don't know about it. And they come to us with maybe a small brain bleed or predisposition to a brain bleed, and then we have a problem because we don't know about it. This is one of the tools that Dr. Williams, and we are all hoping will help us minimize the chances of something happening in our jurisdiction, particularly because we have the most fights of any place in the world. The cost, from what I understand, please correct me, Dr. Williams, if I'm wrong, is with these, the probes, right? So maybe there's a way for us to work something out with, because it's not the machine is one cost, but then, or the system is one cost, but then it's the small probes that.
Yeah, the electrodes. So the electrodes, there is a charge for those disposables. The company previously had an arrangement where they were collecting data, and if an individual clinic or urgent care center or ER or what have you provided de-identified data to their registry, they would essentially reimburse the cost of those electrodes up to a certain number. But what I was talking to Andy about is I think this represents our scenario represents an additional potential benefit to the company, and they may be very interested in working with us to defer the cost of those disposable electrodes, because it's a completely different environment than they've been involved in.
I was actually looking at some of their studies, and I think maybe we can talk about this a little bit later, but maybe we can be of help to each other, because they've done studies with, I think, several hundred, almost 1,000 people. Some of them are pre-selected, some of them are not pre-selected, but they don't have any studies of athletes, let's say, that maybe we can get them from 18 to over 40. And maybe we can help them with that. But the other thing that maybe they can help us with is with the studies they've already done with some of the athletes, and they did do a study with athletes. I think it was almost 700 athletes, where we can ask them to parse out the data with the female athletes to see if there are really more concussions, or if they're really, things like that for our gender.
Yeah, and just for some of the concussion indexes and that kind of thing, actually they go down to age 13 now. So, but yeah, I think there are a number of potential collaborative points between our combat sports, both professional and amateur potentially, and male versus female. So I think there are a lot of options.
Could I just, I think that's a great idea, especially thinking about how much data they could gather through this process in a partnership with us. The only question I have is consent of the fighter and how that would work out. We have to change rules. We have to, is this like pre-fight, or is this sort of post, like what are we talking about in terms of when and how we collect this data and how we would share it?
I don't know that we need separate consent, because any data that's shared is de-identified. So as long as it can't be traced back to a particular individual, then it doesn't require consent in the traditional sense.
And then and then the other question I have is, because this technology could even identify pre-existing conditions that we don't even know about? How do we alert the fighter? You know, I mean, how do we alert the fighters? I'm not, you know, I mean, we're protecting the fighter, but, you know, fighters may, you know, it could impact their career. You know, I mean, how do we think about, have we thought about these issues, or how would we think about these issues? I think it's a good idea. I'm in support. I'm just saying, how do we actually ensure that the fighter understands what they're agreeing to and what it means for them?
I don't, in my opinion, and I'm open to, you know, suggestions that may determine otherwise, but I don't see it as any different from what we're currently doing with the C3 Logics testing as part of our, you know, neurologic assessments, and you know, the addition of technology contributing to those assessments. I don't think requires a new or separate, evaluation or consent or what have you.
So how many years ago did we start C3 Logics program?
About 2.5.
In about 2.5 years or so. Yeah.
So let's say we're in our third year and there's protocols for all of this stuff.
Great.
And exactly to your point, do you share the information, of course, with the individual physicians? It's up to them, and then the rest is de-identified and it goes into a database. So there are protocols for this stuff. So you asked for a quote from BrainScope 1,
Yes, sir.
and they weren't brainy enough to get us back a quote.
We haven't got it yet.
Who was? How did we find them, and who's working with them?
Commissioner Iquitos brought it to, I think, to our attention, and then I talked to Dr. Williams a little bit about it at the last, and then I brought it back. So yeah.
Okay, fine.
I didn't say anything. I just asked how we got.
Let's talk, because I know the
Okay.
CEO. And,
Okay.
You know the CEO?
Yeah.
Maybe Dr. Williams?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
You guys will work together
Absolutely.
to,
right.
and similar to the negotiations, remember, with C3 Logics, we got them another machine out of them, right, Andy?
Yes, sir.
So we're the state of California, don't you want to get to work with us and that kind of thing? And, yeah.
Are they
So-
dealing with any other sports organization now?
So they're dealing with a number of concussion clinics. Most of their relationships in terms of their early studies and validation has been with the Department of Defense, and then with various emergency rooms and urgent care centers. They do have embedded in the system a concussion assessment version that's used by the NFL.
Is used.
That is used by the NFL.
So the NFL now, how do they use it?
If a team uses this system to collect that NFL data, that's how they would use it. But the individual teams are able to use C3. Actually, they started using C3 Logics this year as well as a platform for collecting the data required by the NFL in the preseason baseline testing and post-concussion testing. So people can collect it on different devices. This is one of the devices. Right.
Okay, it sounds like a great activity to bring. So you'll come back to the next commission meeting, you'll have some pricing and a great deal for us that we can approve and justify and go forth.
Maybe we should put the next meeting off till March.
Well, I mean, yeah, you know, that is also possible, if whatever works for everybody. It's not like, I don't know of anything that's urgent in January or February, so we can keep all that open. Okay, anything more on this matter? We're not, we simply have a recommendation to move forward, and Dr. Williams and Martha will follow up and work with you to get us all the information we need. Great. And if you want to bring them in so we can browbeat them, please do. Great.
And then we'll see if this can work.
That's right. That's right.
They can,
Maybe we can all be tested.
exactly. I'm okay for that. I'll go for it.
Why don't you do the secret?
All right, agenda item number 7, review and approval of amendments to the Commission's Bout contract and new policies to be added to the Commission's administrative manual. Mr. Foster.
Mr. Chairman, several pieces here. On the first piece is when AB 5 was signed into law.
Could you describe the Commission's administrative manual?
Yes, sir. The Commission's administrative manual is a manual that has all of the Commission's policies, the rules, the regulations, the law, the procedures, the way that we do things, the way that this Commission operates. The idea behind the administrative manual, and when we put it together a few years ago, was if we suddenly all disappeared, we need a
Policies and procedures and a
Right.
roadmap to the, yeah.
yeah, we need a continuity plan, somebody that could come in here and do exactly what we do, just look at a piece of paper and read it. How are we doing this? So this comes to a lot of this, but the first piece of it was the Bout agreement, and when AB 5 was signed into law, which is the independent contractor employee distinction, I called DCA Legal and I asked DCA Legal, look, would you please take a look at this and make the appropriate changes to our Bout agreement so we're legal? And Mr. Swenson?
I can speak to that, Mr. Chair. The problem that AB 5 seeks to cure is misclassification of employees as independent contractors. And as the commission is aware, going back to the early days of prize fighting, boxers have been considered independent contractors, not employees of the promoters. And the modern martial arts and combat athlete is a product of this history. And what we're attempting to do here is to make clear in the Bout agreement that the promoter and the athlete is not, they're not entering into an employment relationship. So
Right.
the language we have here at the bottom of the form and over to the second page just makes clear that we're maintaining the independent contractor status of the athlete in light of AB 5. I'll be happy to answer any specific questions the commissioners have.
Great. What other changes to the manual, please?
Wait,
Go ahead.
Okay, we're on the Bout contract
Yep.
still?
Yep.
Okay. It's gotta be bigger type. I mean, this is gonna be
Oh,
an
this
adhesion
document?
contract for the very purpose that it's such small type. Yeah.
Well, this is just for us, right?
It's
It'll be-
just for,
No, it's this small normally. And
well, but it's on a legal document, it's a legal triplicate. It's on one page, but it's a little bigger than this. It's a little bigger than this. This is really small, I agree.
Yeah, and there's legal repercussions. If things are really small, they're not binding.
It's
Okay.
it's readable. It's on legal size paper. I mean, it's still small, but it's not this small.
Okay, that's just something to consider.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
And,
And they get a copy to take home. It's not like they don't. And they see it over and over, and it's on the website.
so going forward, it's helpful if there's a red line, but that's all right. So I assume that the changes to the Bout contract are the last paragraph, the independent contractor relationship?
That's correct.
Okay, so looking at that, I'm a bit concerned because the promoter does pay into the pension, and the promoter does pay insurance. So I just worry if that was considered and is inconsistent with the language.
I don't think it's consistent with the language because of first of all, the historical context of treating fighters as independent contractors. And in addition, there was at least comment, if not testimony, during the process of enacting AB 5 to make clear that it didn't apply to this promoter athlete relationship. And so I think that while as factors it may play into an analysis, it doesn't necessarily mean.
I'm just here, I'm fine on the law, okay, but I'm worried about the terms of the contract. Because someone reading this could say, well, now I don't have any health insurance. I'm not insured for this bout. And reading this, it sounds like there's no pension either.
You
So I'm
mean-
worried about the wording.
This, what you're saying is that this could potentially cause the promoter to not have to get insurance.
Or it would be confusing to the boxer thinking, well, I'm not eligible for a pension, I'm not covered by insurance for the
That's
spouse.
not up to the promoter or the boxer, that's our requirement. We're following the rules. We require the pension contribution, right?
Isn't-
Right,
but the
but it's
commission-
paid by
the-
the promoter,
Is it paid, it's paid into a fund that the commission manages, not the promoter.
but the promoter pays it.
Well, I mean, you can always say that, you can
So-
always put an exclusion in here
This,
that is subject to.
This controls the relationship between the fighter and the promoter.
Right.
And then above,
Taking up.
yeah, it's an artifact, obviously, of shrinking it to fit our book. But the idea is that they're agreeing also to follow the commission rules and regulations. And so I don't think anything in a Bout agreement could reasonably be construed to nullify any provision of law. They're bound by the general law. And
I have an idea. Since we're rewriting things, can we just rewrite this?
Yeah, and I don't like the language about the 20%, because it says contestant fails to make the contract weigh at the official weigh-in, but the fight is allowed to occur. I wanted to include
Well,
that.
hang on, please.
So anyways-
Let's hang on here,
Okay.
guys. We have a document that's been reviewed and approved by legal for us to consider, so that's number one. I don't even think we let Ken finish his answer. Can you repeat your answer about the rule of law, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
nothing in the Bout agreement will nullify or change existing law, either in statute or regulation. And in fact, here they're agreeing to be bound by the commission's law. This just focuses in on the relationship between the fighter and the promoter. And I don't think that it could reasonably be construed to mean that they're agreeing to anything outside the law.
Yeah, but you're expecting the boxer to
Hang on,
understand
Martha.
this.
Has
you-
this copy been written?
Folks,
What you're talking about here?
can we hang on a second, commissioners? We're jumping all around. Commissioner Layman, you were asking questions, so he answered that question. Do you have other questions before we start talking about it? We can move on.
Disagreement, and the point that, to the extent we're supposed to protect the boxer, I think it's clear that the boxer's rights need to be more clearly stated, because right now it implies that they don't have things, and I just think it's badly written. Well, it could be rewritten, and also the end of the point. And so
Hang on.
I don't know where it's been in this process. This is the first time I've seen this, you know, and I think it needs more work.
Right.
All right, you were talking, then Commissioner Araby. Go ahead, Martha, finish your point.
So I understand what you're saying, and I agree. If I were to read this, I agree. That's my interpretation. But it wasn't written for me, and this was not written for necessarily, because not all boxers have attorneys. In fact, most boxers don't have attorneys. Most boxers don't actually have managers. So I think if, you know, I don't even know how much of this they are gonna actually read, but if they do read it, it will probably be confusing. So, I'm of the mind that even though they have to have legal things in them that we know, I mean, I was of the mind 10, 15 years ago that even though we have contracts and we have legal language, that they don't have to be written in legalese so that people don't understand things. And we do this kind of to confuse people. So I do agree that maybe we should just rewrite things in a clear, concise, like, simple phraseology for normal people, as opposed to for us lawyers. Just saying.
So Commissioner Araby, then Commissioner Sauter.
So could we, both to Martha and Mary's point, could we be more explicit about the role of the commission as it relates to benefits guaranteed versus the role of the relationship between the fighter and the promoter? Because basically what AB 5 is a determination of who employs whom, right? And one of the main determinations is if you're doing the bulk of the work for that company, then you work for that company. But if a promoter has multiple relationships with multiple boxers, they don't necessarily explicitly employ the individual, right? Nor does the boxer necessarily have a exclusive relation with that promoter. So I think just being more clear on the role of the promoter and fighter relationship and the role of the commission in guaranteeing benefits that are by law would help clarify the point, to make sure that they understand their guarantees and what they're signing.
Commissioner Sauter? Okay.
Right.
Hang on. Dr. Williams, do you have any comments on this? Okay. Commissioner Layman?
For the provision about the forfeiture liquidated damages, the last sentence, in addition, the last sentence, manager shall also forfeit a sum of money to contestant's opponent equal to that which was forfeited by the contestant. Is that 20% of the purse as well as 20% of the proceeds? It was not clear to me.
Yes, ma'am. If you see my memo that I put in the thing, I'm still working on that liquidated damages section. That's my first best good try at it, but I didn't get there. I didn't have enough. Me and Kim went back and forth and the whole thing, and we just didn't get there. And we're going to have it next meeting, what that's going to look like. So really, it's really just the piece that I'm looking at on the thing is we're just the current status quo. If a contestant fails to make the contract weight at the official weigh-in, 20% of the contestant's entire proceeds, other than the purse, as contemplated by the fund, shall be forfeited. That whole thing ending with it's just the standard language that's currently in there.
The manager, but on my version, the last sentence says manager should also forfeit.
Yes, ma'am, it does.
Okay, is that the current language?
Yes, ma'am.
So it hasn't been changed?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, well, I'll be happy to help you with that.
Okay.
Yeah, going forward, yeah. Use us. So
I have had conversations with both Andy and Ken with regard to updating this Bout contract, and I've had them in terms of timing. So AB 5 will become law on January 1, correct?
Yes, sir.
That's correct.
Okay, so this is our last meeting of the year. So my conversation with them is let's put in as many protections on behalf of the fighter, which is our responsibility, to preserve their independent contractor status. We all agree that that's our mission, correct? We don't want them classified as employees. They don't want to be classified employees. The promoters don't want them classified as employees if it not work for,
our mission is
Combat sports.
to protect the boxer.
which is what I'm saying, so yes.
Okay.
Okay, what? Go ahead.
Oh, because that's not only clarifying that he's not an independent contractor. Okay.
Okay. And so, if we have, Commissioner Araby's point is good, I mean, and I mentioned it earlier, well, I was just assuming that everyone understood what the role of the commission was in this. With the state of California, we have our rules and regulations, you have to follow them. It contribute to a pension and all the other things that we have put into the law. And so if there is some, I'm asking that if there is some clarification that would work for you all, that we could perhaps do so now and have it in place for them
In the meantime,
before next year.
before the big revise, you mean? I mean, I guess we could just put the truncated version, I think, you know, maybe, Mary, you would be okay with this in the independent contract relationship portion, subject to the provisions of, and you can put the pension rules and regs and whatever else you think needs to be put in there, and the insurance portion, right?
Yeah. Was it necessary to include all these details? You know, the like last couple sentences?
This bottom.
You mean the very two last sentences?
Yeah, nothing that's about contract.
Well, but doesn't that make the whole point about clarifying the relationship between them and the promoter?
If you just say it generally, there's no independent contractor, but you start to define it, and then that kind of creates problems. I don't know.
I think the idea is to make clearer what, there aren't those obligations to pay those taxes and
Well, why can't we
withholdings.
just say, subject to the provisions of, what is it, the California Rules of Regulations 401 through 405, and Business and Professions Code 18882, or whatever that is, whatever number that, I can't remember, right? That's the pension, right? And then the one, I don't remember what the number is for the insurance that requires them to carry insurance.
Yes, sir.
I'm sort of lost in here, but would there be value in having a human, understandable version of all this prepared for the fighters? Because I don't think, I mean, I can't understand most of this stuff, and I'm not convinced the fighters are going to fare better. But there was a marvelous conversation between a guy who ran a huge bank, and he was talking to some of his staffers who were explaining a technical detail of mortgages, and he said, "Talk to me as though I was a child, a Labrador retriever. Can we get a version of all this that's made for people like me, which make it understandable?" I mean, there's obviously something that has to be done, I presume, legally here. But if we're concerned about what the fighter has access to in terms of understandable information, should we be preparing something at their level?
We can certainly do that, sir. We can put that together.
Please speak up.
We can certainly put that together, sir.
Well, is it of
yeah.
any value? I don't want you to put it together unless it's of value.
Yes, sir. I think it is of value. I think that some fighters don't recognize all of the provisions in this. Now, many fighters, not all, many, have handlers who will handle this stuff for them.
Do we think the handlers know what all this is about?
I would hope so, but
I hope it's a white Christmas, but it's.
yeah.
Okay, well,
The idea that.
we often put out brochures, memos, and things, making things very clear to, they're issued by you, and we review them. For example, on the notification on the scoring that we're going to talk about, right, where there's a very clear memorandum that goes out to Commissioner Sauter's point, actually describing to people in very clear terms what this means. So yes, so you can do that, and I think you should.
Okay.
Can we get back to Commissioner Shinakita's point, though? Maybe Ken respond to that. Can we make those clarifications?
I think it's possible to add language today that would address those issues, and then to the point of the plain English version, it's possible to develop something that is in plain English. It would be a fairly substantial undertaking to change the language of the entire Bout agreement, and it would necessarily make it longer, I'm afraid. And there's always a trade-off between the plain English version of something and the length of it. If it gets to be too long, then of course people are less likely to read it.
So I don't think that's a great idea. And then it would go through the DCA bureaucracy. I hope we're not headed down that direction. I'm talking about a policy and procedure or memo that takes the Bout agreement that we agreed to and update and describes it for our stakeholders. That's, I think, Commissioner Sauter's point, right? There's
I
a
think he
document.
was talking about rewriting the whole contract.
Well, that's what so now then that's a process that will probably take who knows how long. But
I think we
are
can
we sure
write,
this is a good idea? I don't
I
think so.
think we can write this Bout agreement so it's shorter and more concise and in plain English. I don't think it's going to make it longer. I mean, having written many contracts, many contracts, probably thousands of contracts in my lifetime, I think making it more concise and in plain English always makes it shorter, not longer. Just saying. Now, going through the DCA process, I don't know about that.
Well, yes, you do. It takes forever.
Well, except we have this new process, don't we?
It takes forever. And you always make that point, Martha, come on.
I do, but I thought we had a new process.
No.
Do our Bout contracts have to go through the DCA?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Which is why they put the work into this, but which we can clarify, which is what I'm hoping we can
Okay,
at least have that conversation here.
That's my solution, then. We can say, subject to the provisions of California Code of Regulations 401 to 405, BMP 18882, and then if somebody can find the requirements for the medical insurance, put that in there, then that excises all of this from that.
Yeah.
Short, simple, done.
I concur with the recommendations from Martha. I think that's a good idea.
Makes sense to me. Commissioner?
Yeah, that's fine with me. And Andy's going to be working on language for the liquidated
That's
damages
the plan.
provision, so, it's a thing in flux, and we can, go through it, and, it's maybe something that everything was just added in bits and pieces, and suddenly it's this unwieldy, ancient document that should deserve a fresh look, and
But
Yes,
I think it's
ma'am.
kind of sad that we can't just make it simpler because the process is so,
It's not that we can't. It goes back to my comment, and my suggestion, if you guys would consider, is let's make your very good solution happen, and then have this in place for the next year, and then continue to work on this document however you guys want to. It's a living document, but at least we'd accomplished that much.
I'm on board.
Okay? So can you make those changes for us?
I think that it's going to, we can make the changes. There'll have to be a motion. And if we could be specific on what's being stricken and what's being added at this point, then the commission could adopt it. We can make any revisions to what we have here and make it ready for the first of
Want
the
to
year.
take the time to write something with Commissioner Martha, and then we can move on to another item? You could do that, and we can come back to it. What would you like to do?
It'd probably be more efficient if we could come up with a specific version at during a break, and then re-present that. And if we pass on this item until we're able to accomplish that, I think that'd be the most efficient approach. That way we avoid any sort of a mistake and optimize the readability of what we're creating here today.
Excellent. Commissioners, okay with that? So we'll table this. At the break, we'll come up with the language we're looking for, and then we'll bring it back for consideration. Excellent. Andy, we're still on this agenda item, though. You have other items.
Yes, sir. The next agenda item, and sir, I want to thank you you were instrumental in helping with this particular policy. We've had a lot of deaths in boxing this year, too many. And I've lost a lot of sleep over, look, I'm not going to be able to make boxing safe. We can make it safer. One of the biggest concerns I have is watching these high round number fights just progressively go and go and go, and it's so one-sided. I'm sitting there thinking, and I've done this my whole life, I'm sitting there thinking, what are we doing? It really came to me this year that, the two people that have the power to stop a fight in the state of California probably should be privy to the score at some point. So I brought to the chair some ideas. He helped me. We went back and forth. We had a lot of iterations, and we came up with the idea that, look, if the thing's one-sided, I'm talking about like basically a shutout or a one-sided, after round 6, after round 8, and after round 10, we're going to confidentially, lead inspector is going to inform the referee and the physician of the score, just confidentially. That's it. You just provide it to them. Everybody else knows the scores at the table. How about the people that can stop the fight? They don't know the score. And I think that's a travesty. And I understand the reason. I looked into the reasons why that was. We live in 2019. We have to make boxing safer, and this will make boxing safer. And by the way, we've had this in place since the 24th of October. Not a single fight's been affected by this. Okay, not a single fight. But I've saw some over the years that I think would have been affected by this. And an exercise in trying to make it to the end of a fight honorably is quite frankly an exercise in that's bad regulation. That's bad. We should not be doing that. And I feel very strongly about that because in mixed martial arts, you can tap out and you're honorably. It's honorable to tap out. It's okay. I mean, nobody's going to make memes of you for the rest of the year, okay? If you quit in boxing, I mean, Roberto Duran, one of the best boxers that's ever lived, is known by 2 words. We're not sure he even said it.
No mas.
Yeah. And I don't think that, like, I've saw quite a few of these, and you know, I'm not going to speak about the tragedies that have happened, but if you go and you look at those particular fights, you know, listen, I've watched those fights. I'm not saying like, you know, I'm trying. Just what can we do better? Can we just, and all this is information, much like the boxing severity index I send out and the algorithms and the notes and all these things. This is simple information. I think providing information empowers the 2 people that are able to make decisions on whether this bout continues. I think that's a positive step towards regulate. Small step. It's not changing boxing. It's not doing a whole lot. But if this helps anybody, it's done its job. So that's that policy. Second policy I have.
Is there an action on this?
Can we talk about it? Or-
So are we going to discuss this, or?
Yeah, we are. Do you have a recommendation, or what is the status of this?
Oh, it's active. We're
Oh,
using
yeah.
it.
By executive officer's direction. Okay. But certainly it's here for discussion. It can be changed by the commission. Commissioners?
Help me, I'm the golden retriever, help me. At a certain point at the 6th round or whatever, the judges make available to the referee what the scorecard has at that point, and that's then shared with the cornermen. I lost some of this.
Yes, sir. Not the cornermen. We certainly don't want to do open scoring where the cornermen and the crowd know the score. Okay, that affects fights. Okay, all I'm talking about is the 2 people that can stop the fight, the ringside physician and the referee, be made privy to the score after the 6th, after the 8th, and after the 10th round.
Made available of this information for what purpose?
So if there's sometimes referees, sir, to go into detail, sometimes referees will think, well, look, you know, I'm going to let this guy have another round. He's not looking good, but I'm going to let him have another round. But if the referee knows that they're down by 8 points in a 10-round fight and there's 2 rounds to go and he's looking bad, that knowledge may assist that referee and that ringside physician to work together to get this guy out of there honorably.
And what's the possibility of the referee interpreting this to mean that he should stop a fight at a certain point in the 7th round with a couple more rounds to go or whatever? Are we burdening them with an obligation to exercise this knowledge? And how do we deal with one fighter who thinks, hey, this is great information to have that knowledge and I'm going to factor it in to my operating concept, and another referee says, I'm adamantly opposed to this, I want this fight to work itself through as scheduled. I mean, you could have referees that have all kinds of opinions
Sure.
on this. Or is this, I mean, are my opinions here fallacious? And
No, they're not. I've thought about that. I don't want to influence what the referee's doing. Okay, I thought about that a lot.
information influences.
Information influences, and I do want to influence in the positive way, in the safe way. But we had a fight just this past weekend, and this policy went in, and it was a full 10 rounds, and it went the full 10 rounds, and it was one of those shutout fights. And I thought, well, this is going to be good because I wouldn't stop this fight. Let's see what happens with it. Nothing happened. It went the full duration. So hopefully it's getting there just by, because when we sent out the memo, look, this is just for your information, just like anything else, but we do think we should be able to possess it. Oftentimes,
Do we put on paper why we think they should have this information?
yes, sir, that's in the memo that I sent
And
out.
are they going to interpret that as a mandate?
Yeah, I wrote in here that finally, the stop about continues to rest exclusively with the referee, and there is no requirement that the scoring information compels the referee or ringside physician to end the bout.
Why is it there?
Then why is it there? Because, sir, in my
Don't they have the capability of stopping a fight at some point if they think the fighter is vulnerable, endangered, incapable of defending him or herself?
They do, sir. It's those shutout type fights where there's no numerical way for the person to win, and if they're taking a lot of damage, I don't see the wisdom in. I mean, me personally, if I'm a referee, I don't see the wisdom in letting this thing continue. I don't. But I'm not trying to influence my referees in that way. That's my personal view. If you're getting shut out 8-0 going into 10 and you've taken a lot of damage, I don't see that, especially with what I've saw this past year. And I actually think, sir, to your point, I think that there needs to be, I'm going to speak to you personally, because we're in a commission meeting, this is the time to talk about it. I do think there needs to be, I think we're having far too many 12s and 10s in boxing, far more than we've ever had in the past. And I've got statistics, I can show that to you all day long. Well, it's part of it, sir, is the proliferation of titles. Okay, sanctioning organizations proliferate titles. There's the WBA gold, the WBA silver. There's all kinds of these belts now. Well, the belts produce larger rounds. Well, you got to have more fighters fight these rounds. And I think that the 12s and the 10s should be more of the exception and not the rule. But I'm kind of digressing, but it does go into this point of why I think this is so necessary is there are so many more 12s and 10s and 8s than there used to be. But I'm really not. I'm talking about 8s, but less so. 10s and 12s. There's so many more of those than there used to be, and California has far more. We have the bulk. This commission does more boxing than, like I said last year, than New York, Nevada, Texas, and New Jersey combined. Okay, so we're getting the bulk of these things, and we're seeing this, and sir, and also to the point, this is just a policy for safety. Oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes the referee knows the scores anyway because they pick up the cards. Now, I'm not saying they always look, but sometimes they do. And it's their privy. It's their right. And by the way, in our BMP code, California still allows the referee to score. We don't do that here, but we still allow it.
Andy, I just had a question. So is there some level of training around the discretion, how referees and physicians use this information? Have you created a sort of criteria just so that they understand that's, they're not, you're not saying that you need to stop the fight. You're just saying you can use this as a point of information. Or,
Right.
and then, so that's one question. The second piece is there, maybe this would be, maybe this wouldn't work because it could tip off the fighters, but is there like a way to your point of making this about safety, is there a sort of procedure that can be put into place in addition to sort of that they're not going to outscore they're not going to get back up to the level of actually, a draw or winning, right? But is there some other sort of criteria along with just points that you could use as a determining factor to inform whether the ref or the physician call the fight or not?
Can I help with that?
Yeah.
I mean, this is part of boxing training. Yeah, this is part of boxing training. I mean, having gone through 3 years of training for a licensed official, I mean, this is all part of the training. If a fighter gets to where you don't think they can win, and if they're suffering like that, you better stop the fight. You better stop the fight. And the problem is sometimes the official is so focused on what is going on in front of them, they become kind of myopic, and they're not looking at the bigger picture. And there have been times when I'm sitting there, and I know the commissioners have been sitting there, and Andy's been sitting there, or Mark, is the chief inspector, sitting there, and the official, not because the official is a bad official, but the official is paying so much attention to what is right in front of them that they are not looking at the bigger picture, and one of us gets up and says, "Excuse me, could you stop this fight?" Or even we've gone to the doctors and said, "Excuse me, could you get in there?" And so this is part of the overall training that they go through with the ABC, with us, that the inspectors go through. It's not anything new. It just codifies that this is what we want. It's nothing new. It's part of the sport. They better stop the the fight. If that fighter has no chance of winning and they're getting beaten up, you better stop it.
That's always been my understanding. And when I first started this, why do we need this? Because you can see that, the referee is aware this person's getting, beat up badly, and as an awareness, they're not winning, and why take more damage? But, as you know, too, there's a lot of fights where a person has lost every single round, but it's still a very competitive, good fight. So I guess yes, our job is, if we want to make boxing completely safe, we don't do any boxing. We don't do any fighting, And so there is this balance that we do for protecting the fighters, but also preserving, this sport. And that, California, is a leader in this. And so I think some of us are concerned of, interfering too much. So, but my determinant factor is how often does a referee not realize that this person's being beat up and taking unnecessary damage and there's no way they can win? I mean, how often does that happen?
Happens sometimes, and it happens here. And I don't know if it's so much that they don't realize it, but when you're a referee and you're in there, you probably know this.
I think it's kind of like when you we don't have a lot of public libraries anymore, but when you're in the library and you're looking for a book and you're so close and you kind of can't find it because it's right in front of your face, but when you sort of back up and you're over there, you can see it. It's like that syndrome,
Eddie, what were you going to say?
And sometimes this is like that, just that little bit of information that referee needs to help make that decision. They're wanting to get the guy out of there, but they're concerned. They're like, maybe he could come back and win. Maybe he could have a puncher's chance. Maybe he can knock out. I'm going to give him one more round. I mean, I've heard all these things from the referee when I've questioned. I don't think a puncher's chance is enough to let a fight go. And let's say it's a 10, because look, Dr. Williams can speak to this. This is one thing that this is why I wrote it the way that I wrote it. I'm not overly concerned about 4s and 6s. Not that they're not dangerous. Of course they're dangerous, but they're not. There's something about the 8s, the 10s, and the 12s. And you talk about 36 minutes of boxing, or there's something about that is like, not just like doubly, it's a lot more dangerous. Like, you start taking those, like, I don't know why it is exactly. I think it's because of the continued headshots and all that type of stuff. But it seems like the tragedies that I've...
Hydration, remember, we've talked a little bit.
And there's that, absolutely. There's a lot of things that are combined here with this. But I guess what I'm saying is that this is just another tool. I provide lots of tools to the referees, but I do think that they should have information. I don't want them to skew it to stop fights that don't need to be stopped. So far, they haven't done that. There's not been any fights that's been influenced by this. But I can think of 2 or 3 right off the bat that happened here in California that I would absolutely like to have this policy in the past. I don't really anticipate hardly any fights, but it is those fights where, to use your term, myopic, they get so into the referee, they don't even really know who's winning, really. They're just focused on what's right in front of them. And it's... because they're not really scoring. Well, we don't have them score anymore, but the BMP code still allows them to score if they wanted to, which I find interesting. But so I don't think there's any like problematic reason. I just don't want to influence them adversely. But at the same time, I would hate for the commission, or not just the commission, forget the government or the commission. I'd hate for any fighter to be seriously injured or worse because we were just letting them finish out the 10 rounds that we'd agreed to regulate when there's just no chance. I mean, just shutouts.
Dr. Williams, do you have any comments?
No, the one note that I make here is, references what Andy talked about in terms of this increased risk with later rounds. So I understand why it would be the 8, 10, 12th rounds, fights that have gone that long, then you do have the significant increased risk and like catastrophic outcomes as compared to earlier rounds. To me, it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, Andy, but it seems like the motivation for this is based on this increased risk we've seen in ring deaths over the last year or so.
Yes, sir. That's exactly. And this is kind of in response, because all this stuff's not in a vacuum. This is kind of in response in the tremendous increase in the number of 10s and 12s this commission's been regulating, and 8s also. But we have seen a tremendous increase in the number of 10s and 12s that we've been regulating, as well as the rest of the country. I would argue that could be potentially the reason why we've saw more of these catastrophic incidents recently. And this proliferation of titles is good and bad, I should say.
And older fighters, too. And older fighters.
We have a policy and procedure that was put in place under the authority of the executive officer, and you want to include it in the administrative manual, correct?
Yes, sir.
So are you asking for us to validate that, or to, what is our action? What's our request here?
The executive officer had the authority to implement this policy. It's within the commission's discretion to ratify the policy if it wishes.
Or change it or not ratify it?
That's correct.
Commission have any pleasure on this policy?
I would just say, Andy, I admire your empathy and your concern. I don't know what the number of recent deaths imply other than 4. Whether there's a linkage, I don't know. Whether there's been enough times between the 10 and 12 and these horror stories, I just don't know. I would look at it and say that I think you could achieve your goal by telling your referees, underscoring for them that they have this responsibility and they have the liberty to exercise it. I'm always apprehensive of passing out information that doesn't say why you're getting the information, but you're getting the information, and there's not a uniform application ultimately of policy and conduct. But you know, I defer to my colleagues on this. I don't have any great passion about it, except I think it'll end up causing perhaps more confusion than clarity.
I would like to perhaps suggest that, we ratify it, but that it be back on the agenda, in 9 months perhaps, to see what effect it's had. I would like to hear from the referees if they thought that it's affected them and their thoughts. I'd like to see if there's any criticism that California's stopping fights too soon. I think that's maybe a fair way of approaching this. I have concerns on both sides, but health and safety is number one, and yeah.
I think that's fair. I'd like to see that myself. I mean, look, if it doesn't work, I don't want it. I just felt like, and I thought about it. He knows.
Did you ask the referees about this?
I did.
And what's the feedback you get from them?
Oh, they love it.
They love it.
They love it. They wanted it. They love it. They said they can't believe this has not been
You
happening.
should have led with that, Andy.
Yeah. See, I want you guys to know that I'm not helping him if you notice. But yes, should have led with that. There's a lesson for you.
Yeah.
You got grilled by a master down at that end, and
Yeah.
you could have led with that kind of information.
Question. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Andy.
Yeah.
I have a question. I mean, in terms of a number of minutes that the fighters are fighting, there isn't a significant difference between a championship MMA fight and a championship boxing fight. And I get that they get to tap out and they're submissions and they're not all KOs and TKO. But, I mean, I've seen people not wanting to tap out and arms broken and, you know what I mean?
But 25 minutes versus 36 minutes, I mean, it is
But
different.
they're not all 12 rounds. You're not just talking about 12 rounds. You're
No,
also
30
talking about
minutes.
10 rounds and 8 rounds.
Yeah.
I mean, is there some thought to, and I get that boxing is much more entrenched and there's, but you do also have the corners that don't want to throw in the towel and, and fighters that go on automatic pilot, because they just think they got to fight. I mean, that happens in every discipline. I mean, just
Does.
think about it.
No, I will think about it. I will think about it. This one's just for boxing, of course.
I think you've heard some apprehension here.
Yes.
And I think it's a lack of clarity in what you're thinking about, talking about what you're trying to achieve, what impact it will or will not achieve. I just think, you have a case to make and you haven't made the case. I mean, I think you can make the case, but you certainly haven't made it to me this morning.
And then you've talked to the referees. What about ringside physicians? Have they had any concerns or?
We're going to have it on the MAC agenda. I spoke to Dr. Wallace about it in depth, about it. He likes it. He likes it. I spoke to Dr. Khan about it. Yeah, I think it's a good. It's a good tool. It's a good tool. But I would like to see in 9 months how it continues to work out, because we've had a lot of fights with it so far since October. I'd like to see a larger volume of how it's actually worked out. One of the good things is it's kind of a blanket, but many of the tens and 12s, not always, blanket statement here, but many 10s and 12s often are competitive. Do you know what I mean? They wouldn't be 10s or 12s.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So this really wouldn't even be applicable to that. But there's been a couple of situations this year where we've had a catastrophic incident where this would have been helpful.
Not here.
Not here. But I mean, listen, I'm not saying we'd stop to,
You want to report to us at the September
Yeah, maybe after the ABC convention and hear how
Yeah.
the other commissions.
Yeah, and I'll have
other
the referees
commissions-
come.
And bring some referees and maybe another member, Dr. Wallace or somebody, to comment on it for us.
Yeah.
It'd be great.
So are we going to move to ratify it in the meantime, subject to a 9-month
Or do we need to
sunset
do anything?
review? I think
We
we're
already
supposed to
taken it.
ratify it.
It's his authority to.
That's correct, and it's otherwise commission discretion if it wants to act today.
Unless we want to change something, I think we've already,
Just do it, right?
right, he's already done it.
He's already done it.
So I don't know if we need an action, except we're asking you to come back in September with other stakeholders to give us an update on this policy.
Yes, sir.
Okay, commissioners?
Sounds good.
Okay. Okay, Andy,
Next
what else?
one's-
Anything else for the administrative manual?
Yeah, the next one's really, really fast. It's just I sent out a thing, I'm tired of the officials showing up at fights, getting their pictures made with celebrities. I've had it with that, so that's what that's about.
Who's doing
Does
this?
it not include us, right? We can get.
No, you're commissioners, that's different, but officials and inspectors, it was embarrassing at one of the fights recently, and that's just a reminder. And then,
We call this the no selfie rule. Yeah.
yeah. And then, the next one, this just came to me, that this should be included in the administrative manual. I think the chair and I were talking about this and about this is the way the next one is the way I approve bouts. This is the bout approval process. If you read the regulations, the bout approval process leaves a lot to be desired. It's just like basically whatever the executive officer thinks, well, this is how I do it. And I've laid it out on a piece of paper of like the way that it looks. And,
Any comments, commissioners, on this?
Thank you for doing this, Andy, and I know it was hard to probably put together all the stuff that you do, but it is very good that everybody sees, and obviously no one, there's so much in your knowledge and intuition and discretion and, insight that can't be put on paper, but this is good for our commission as an institution. The one suggestion I have is on page 2 under procedure. It says to properly approve proposed matches, the following must be considered. I have concerns about that because if for something went wrong and there was a mismatch and someone could point to our policy and procedure and said, you did not look at a YouTube video. Okay. So it probably should say should be considered or may be considered. It might, in the executive officer's discretion, maybe confirm that it's in your discretion always.
well, that's great. I like that. Look at number 8, if you'll see that, and that's just for future reference. It's my opinion, and it's the way I think that it's good policy that a boxer with a +6 or higher on the severity index should not be approved in California. I think that's good policy. Look, maybe I should say without like coming and getting a license from the commission, because staff approving somebody with that kind of records.
Right.
You saw at the last meeting, I brought a +7 to the commission. So anyway, that's what that is, and that concludes my.
Wait. I have 2 things. Number 1, I think that I would really like for you to change box rec to the official data collector, because
Where are we?
throughout the document.
Remove the
Under
word box rec?
Yeah, I mean, it can say, such as box rec, because that isn't necessarily always going to, what if, God forbid, something happens, or if
You're right.
the ABC changes from box rec to somebody else?
You're right.
And then, just very quickly, at some point, you're going to come up with something like this for MMA, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I know it will be different, but
And it will be different. Let me just explain quickly to, I know this is really just for just why boxing was first, okay, versus MMA. MMA, many times the promoter has both sides of the card. Does that make sense? Like, they have both sides. They don't care who wins. It's a win for them, like, because they're producing.
Good fight.
So they have a financial interest in producing. Boxing's different. Boxing, you have a B side where you have a financial interest in the A side beating the B side, and that's the, to me, and absolutely what she said. I will absolutely do it because I think it's great. But I just want I think for the commissioners, for your policymakers, I think that's an important distinction to always keep in your mind. It's like, that's the difference.
You've done a nice thing here, but you're giving away your secret sauce, man. I mean,
Yeah.
I would advise you to redact this. But good for you. Is this something the commission would consider ratifying with those two changes we made?
absolutely.
I need a motion then.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. And so we had two changes, may be considered and remove box rec and refer to the generic
It should be considered.
data,
Should be considered, right, Mary? I think she said should be.
or may, she said, we either.
Should be.
What do you think? Because if we say
You guys,
should,
unbelievable, I picked the wrong one.
I know.
Really? Okay, should.
Two different things.
should, and then confirm in the executive officer's discretion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so
And
it's, yeah.
discretion, and box rec will be made generic. And with those changes, we have a motion and a second. Yeah, we should have a comma.
Or semicolon.
Stab you any minute.
All right. Any members we have a motion and a second in discussion. Any members of the public would like to comment on this policy and procedure approval of contestants? You're welcome to do so now. Seeing none, Mr. Foster, call the vote.
Commissioner Araby,
Aye.
Chairman Carvelli,
Aye.
Vice Chair Layman,
Aye.
Commissioner Senior Iquitos,
Aye.
Commissioner Dr. Williams.
Aye.
And then finally, in the administrative manual, sir, we just have the memo that you and I worked together on in 2017 after I'd witnessed a fight which essentially is much like Commissioner Sauter had suggested that I'd send out. We've sent this out in 2017, and I've been attaching it to a lot of the bout approvals that I'm sending out lately just to refresh the referees and the ringside physicians of their responsibility. I like this document. I like it. I think it's good for California. I like what it does.
What about stakeholders? I'm going to help you this time.
Yeah, they've seen it. I've not seen it to all of them, but I will send it to the promoters as well.
Stakeholders, your referees, the people that you're,
Yeah, the referees absolutely saw it, but I'll send it to the various stakeholders. But I like, this talks about and goes into great detail about we're not just there to, you've got to fight and you've got to win some rounds, that type of thing.
any comments on this
Maybe at the MAC,
real policy?
there can be some discussion with the thing about being a ringside physician, and I know you do the training with the officials, but there's a big difference between being a physician and a ringside physician. Being a ringside physician requires working as a team and not as like the top dog. That physicians sometimes don't understand, and so there have been multiple occasions where I see Mark or Andy and even me and some of the other commissioners might say, can you please get in? And they just won't. They just will not, because they think that this person can survive. And yeah, it's not a fatal, it's not, injury or whatever, but it just makes me so mad, because if Andy gets up and says, I would like you to go in there and stop the fight, they better get up there and stop the fight, and they just don't.
I don't
You're
know,
telling the physician to
gonna-
stop the fight? Or to examine the boxer?
just to examine the boxer, just to take a look. Really,
Yeah.
really, I've never
That's
said
the-
stop
that's
the
the-
fight.
If one of
Distinction.
us, but
Important.
if one of us is concerned about anything, if one of us is concerned about something, there's a you know what I mean? They should have, so I get that, and sometimes maybe it's just optics, right? Sometimes it's not, but that's an issue too. So I think it's the whole, it isn't necessarily just about stopping the fight. There's optics, there's working as a team, it's a whole, you know what I mean? It's a whole package deal, being an official, being a referee, being a ringside physician.
So what do we want to do?
So I think in not just sending out the memo, but in having the discussion in training at the MAC and figuring out how to get that message across, maybe Dr. Williams can help with the physicians and the training with the officials.
I can tell you that very issue has been discussed at the MAC on a number of occasions. The responsibility that the ringside physician has, and the fact that is something that we take very seriously, or they take very seriously. I've heard and listened to discussions about how to work with the referee. But I agree that's something that needs to continuously be reinforced, especially as we have additional training sessions and we have new physicians acting as ringside physicians. But I've witnessed that discussion take place, Andy, right?
Yes, sir.
On a number of occasions.
And I will tell you, it's not the new ringside physicians, it's generally the more senior ones. I'm just saying. So I'll just leave it at that.
By the way, just out of curiosity, Andy, is this something that's present in other states as well, or is this unique to California, or most states have this where the ringside physician, the referee are both empowered to stop a fight?
No, sir, no, I'm not going to say no states have it. New York, the ringside physician can stop the fight, I think. But by and large, that's a unique situation. The unified rules allow the referee to stop the fight. California does not use the unified rules of boxing except in championship contests per the law. But the referee the referee and the ringside physician can stop the fights, but in other states, many other states, only the referee.
Commission wish to ratify this, or what's your pleasure, folks?
Yes, I would,
Want to make a motion?
yes. So moved.
A motion to ratify this policy? We have a second to ratify this policy. Any other commissioner comments? Here's an opportunity for members of the public to comment on this policy dated March 7, 2017. Referee and ringside physicians stopping contests.
For inclusion in the manual.
Excuse me?
For inclusion in the manual.
For inclusion in the manual. Seeing none of the public willing to speak, call the roll, please.
Commissioner Araby,
Aye.
Chairman Carvelli,
Aye.
Vice Chair Layman,
Aye.
Commissioner Sauter, Commissioner Senior Quitos,
Aye.
Commissioner Dr. Williams.
Aye.
6-0, sir.
Okay. So we've ratified two policies for you. One is considered a pilot, and you'll come back in September to update the commission on that. And the other you're going to work on during the break.
Yes, sir.
Good?
And, sir, just for your information, I plan to have new manuals for all the commissioners at the next meeting with these new, because I know Commissioner Araby hasn't gotten one yet, so, yeah.
Okay, does that conclude your presentation for agenda item number 7?
Yes, sir.
Okay, agenda item number 8, review and possible action approving proposed changes to sections 401 through 405 of Article 12, Division 2 of Title 4 of the California Code of Regulations to remove the break-in service from the boxer pension plan eligibility requirements. Mr. Foster.
Mr. Chairman, this came from the Pension Fund Subcommittee, Commissioner Araby and Vice Chair Layman. in fact, at the last meeting, the reason it's on this agenda is Vice Chair Layman told me on the call that we had, don't drop the ball on this. I want to see this. And I think DCA's legal staff will tell you that I have pushed hard that this was going to appear. And the regulations unit worked hard. He's here in the room, Clay Jackson. Clay.
Hi, Mr. Jackson. Welcome.
Yeah, yeah.
If it's all right, we'll have Clay approach.
Please,
Sure.
please.
It's a pleasure to introduce the regulation attorney that's been assigned to the commission, Clay Jackson. He comes to DCA with a wide range of legal experience, from litigation to policy development. He has extensive background in regulations, and I think he's going to be a good part of the team.
Welcome.
Good morning.
I hope my cracks earlier about the process, please don't take them personally. I don't know you, and I'm sure.
Well, if I might, the regulation unit was designed to allow Ken to be general counsel and not have to jump in and continually work on regulations. It could take a week of his time, because he's got numerous clients, and in order to allow him to do general counsel work, they created the regulation unit so that we can focus on getting regulations through for our various clients. So that's why the unit was done, and it should help speed things along, at least more.
Great.
You want to go over the various changes?
Okay.
Well, I mean, I can say what this was. The break-in service was to be removed just because of simplicity's sake. It's just easier to say, you fight 75 rounds in California, scheduled rounds, you get a pension. That's easy. And when we did the work with Beth to determine the financial implications of what this would look like, would this create a big burden? It would not create a big burden. But I do think it sounds easier. It's easier to understand for a boxer or for anybody. If you have all these break-in service requirements, that's tough. And we have a lot of cleanup, as you noticed in this document. Commissioners, I was very against sending out what's in your packet, like this mess, but I was told this is the way that it had to come.
And when I first got this, I thought, okay, I can just, look at the couple of things that were being deleted and move forward from there. But my thought was, this is a pension document, and pension documents have a certain feel. They're insurance contracts, essentially. And so I went and was looking at the various defined terms and noted it's defined, but then it's not carried out throughout the entire document. So I pretty laboriously I did see that I missed a couple, believe it or not, but essentially you've got defined terms, and then my comments were to actually maybe add more definitions, because there's defined terms, but then within the actual text of some of these regulations, there's terms that are continually used, but they're not defined. Now, I made some comments about terms such as bout and fight and that, and in the world and in the context of the commission, those are well understood. But as Commissioner Sauter had requested, this is something that needs to be able to be picked up by anyone. And if somebody that's not part of the sporting world looked at this, they might wonder, well, what's a bout? What's a fight? And because you're using these terms to provide a benefit to people, you've got to really lean on making it clear, making it concise, and making sure that maybe not a Labrador Retriever, but at least a 4-year-old will understand it. And that's actually what we're taught. One of the few things we're actually taught in law school that carries over to the real world is you want to be able to speak to somebody with like an 8th grade education and make sure they understand it. And so that's kind of where I was going. So there are terms in here that I would add into the definitions. You do want to ultimately take out a comment that I made in the text and not in a comment box. And so those kind of things you should allow staff to do without the board or the commission's further vote. But I think most of the things I'm recommending are straightforward. I did make several substantive changes, and I looked for it during the time I was sitting out there. I believe I recommended doing a payout, a single payout, to reduce it to present value.
Where is that in this document?
That's what I couldn't find, but it was there's the payout to a one-time payout.
Yeah, I'm looking for it.
And it would be under the one-time payout, so you could either take it over
Tricia, do you have it
time.
up on your screen?
Is it a present cash value?
Right.
So probably it should say present cash value is present value. Because it'd be different if it was some other, right?
Well, what it does is if somebody took a payout today, which would be all of taking a lifetime benefit and taking it today, the value today of that lifetime benefit is less than 100% of what they might get over time, because over time they're figuring out that there's interest involved, and something else that would be unfair to the rest of the people in the fund would be if you take it today, you're avoiding, of course you're avoiding the increase, but you're also avoiding losses. And so determining present value, that's why I'd suggested that.
So perhaps section 403? Page 4?
Yeah. But there's a difference between present value and present cash value. So I'm just saying, if you are talking about present cash value, then it needs to be stated as a present cash value, because in the
That's fine.
actuarial tables will be different, right, in terms of what that value is. But yeah, okay, I understand what you're saying.
And it also made reference to making things payable in U.S. currency, whether you say U.S. dollars or U.S. currency. But that's
Depends on the comma.
I've seen people, when they're the ones having to pay, they'll say, okay, here's your money, and it's in Canadian funds. But they're dollars, but they're Canadian. And so, obviously they're paying less. And so you want to be specific in what you're
That makes
paying.
sense, and we have many Mexican fighters.
So
and-
normally, you would write USD, I mean, that's how you would write it.
However it's done, I just,
Yeah. So, okay,
So thank you for all this work.
yeah, it's a lot of work.
And so what would you have us do? Folks, staff? Then we'll turn it over to Commissioner. Were you asking
Probably.
for us to, there's a recommendation that we approve the proposed changes, the attached proposed changes. Is that what you're asking?
That's correct, sir.
Okay.
And allow us to make non-substantial changes
make
for
non-substantial.
cleanup of this document and anything that needs to be done that's non-substantive.
Okay, Commissioner Layman, do you have something before we make a motion?
Yeah, I think that's a good thing, because on our plate is pension for MMA. So to the extent that we can create a good format boilerplate for boxing, because then that will help us when we go to the MMA side. I do have concerns, and when people are the ability to decide when something is substantive and not, because this stuff is really complicated to me, and if I was good at math, I would have gone to med school, but I didn't. So I don't know if you want to get Beth involved in some of this, because she knows how it works, and she has an idea of what all these terms mean and how it works in her head, and I just want to make sure that in defining things that we don't make a mistake. Yeah,
I would agree.
yeah. Okay, great. Okay, okay. So I would make a motion to approve the substantive changes and with the discretion. It's already written. Okay.
It says in the recommendation 401 to 405 and 408. Can we just say 401 to 409? Because if we're adding cleanup, there might be some cleanup in those sections.
Will you make that motion?
Yes, or we can just do the whole pension plan, yeah?
Right.
Okay. Okay. I move the commission that we approve the attached changes, substantive changes, to remove the break in service of the Bacher pension plan, as we've already approved, and to clean up the language in the entire pension plan to make it consistent and accurate.
And
That good?
readable.
Council?
Yeah.
Ken, is that a good motion? Good to go?
I would recommend including a proviso that the staff is authorized to make minor,
Non-substantive.
non-substantial technical changes.
No, not minor, just non-substantive.
Minor, substantial, or non-technical changes.
Okay.
Or minor or non-substantial and technical changes.
Well, what's minor?
Yeah, what does that mean?
Commissioner Layman, if it's, I would like to bring this back
I think it's
once,
kind of a bird.
We can bring it back at the next meeting.
yeah, I would like to bring it back at the
Bring
next.
it back. Tell me why.
If there are any concerns.
If there's a
Because this whole
cons-
thing about losses, are we defining present
Well,
value?
it's-
Correct tax value? I don't know.
If it's necessary, we can bring it back. If it's not necessary, we don't bring it
Yeah,
back.
no,
How
we
about
don't need
that?
to, we're here, we can, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted, you don't want to see the fine.
I mean, why
It's
do we
okay.
have to say minor? How about non-substantive changes and whatever,
Make your motion.
yeah.
We can
I mean, we don't have to
Go ahead.
qualify it. Why do I have to qualify it?
Wasn't it fine as it was?
Yeah.
Just, maybe just add the non-substantive changes.
I thought I said it, non-substantive. You want to read back my motion? Okay.
Okay, we have a motion, and we have a second?
Second.
We have a second and a third. Okay, any comments from the public on this easy-to-read pension plan document? Seeing none, please call roll.
Commissioner Irby,
Aye.
Chairman Carvelli,
Aye?
Vice Chair Layman,
Aye.
Commissioner Sauter, Commissioner Senior Quidez,
Aye.
Commissioner and Dr. Williams.
Aye.
6-0, sir.
Mr. Jackson, thank you for all the work and help, and thank you all for all the work and help, including the commissioners on the subcommittee. So this is all good, good stuff.
Before we move on, I spent like 10 hours rewriting most of this, so I gave it to Sophia. Because I just couldn't live with the language. So could you, I just rewrote a lot of stuff because I just couldn't live with it. So could you look at it before
It's up to you.
pension plan people?
Sure.
Get it from her.
You'll send it to the pension subcommittee?
Yes, sir.
Okay, please, thank you.
I just couldn't take it.
Okay, couldn't take it anymore.
I just couldn't take it.
Okay, we'll do item number 9, then we'll go to break. So, agenda item number 9, subcommittee updates. Pension Fund Subcommittee, Commissioners Layman and Araby. Would you finish this item? I have to go.
Okay, all right. So we are going gangbusters in distributions to the pension, as you'll see in our, thank you for this great chart. There are very few vested pension right people that are still in the box.
What? Pension? What?
People who are entitled to a pension, we found them, and we owe. Who is helping us do that most?
WBC, Mauricio.
Yes. Okay, and we continually thank them. Yes. And was there something that we did in public? There was like a check. Did we give a check in public, or did people mention that
ma'am.
in public? Could
Yes,
you tell
ma'am.
us about that, Andy?
we went to the fight at the Avalon Theater, and Commissioner Senior Iquitos came and gave out a check to a pension recipient who is now, interestingly enough, a volunteer with the commission for an inspector, and
We're so happy.
When?
may become an inspector in the future as he's trained. So
Okay.
it's good. I thought it was a good. Yeah, and he's been out training with us and whole thing.
Yeah, so I'd like to do that more is, just at public things, like an announcer at fights can just mention it. Every opportunity to mention it, it doesn't have to be, giving a check to someone, but that obviously gets attention. Yeah, so let's just keep it on our radar. Anything that you've been seeing in phone calls coming in, Sophia? Okay. Okay.
We've seen an increase in activity in the office, pension inquiries. A lot are people that are not eligible. They're not in the plan, but I'm noticing that the word's getting out.
So they're not in the plan because they don't have a sufficient number of rounds?
Or they were in the prior plan, and because this plan is 1996 to
Okay.
present. Some of them were paid out and didn't remember that they were paid out.
I have that problem too.
I have a few of those, so,
Okay.
or not enough rounds
Okay.
here in California.
Okay, so, but the word's getting out, and so people know, and all right, okay, sounds good. Do you have any recommendations of other stuff for us to do? Anybody in the public have any recommendations for other outreach?
We're almost finished with that MMA analysis because Beth got that back to us. She's working on it. We should have something for the subcommittee to look at in the future.
Hey, Andy, should we schedule another? We haven't had a call in a while. Probably should schedule another call once that comes back. Maybe is that going to be done before the
Yes,
next
sir.
meeting?
Yes, sir. I think so.
MMA is somebody else, isn't that you? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's me. Do you want to do it with me?
Okay, thank you. Sounds good. If there's no public comment on the pension fund subcommittee, and we can talk about the gender equity task force, I meant to call you. Do you think you can talk a little bit about the stakeholder meeting that we had in LA?
Do that now?
Yeah, that'd be great, and then we'll break for lunch.
So after the last meeting, we had, along with the weight cutting stakeholder meeting, we also had a gender equity stakeholder meeting. And interestingly, the only people who spoke were males. But it was very it was very participatory. We discussed the 2-minute rounds. We discussed pay inequity. And a big subject was the 2-minute rounds. And so that takes me back to Brain Scope 1. And WBC is squarely against it. And as long as WBC is squarely against changing the 2-minute boxing round to 3 minutes, although there has been 3-minute rounds since that time. I think the WBA fought 3 minutes in Nevada, right?
Yeah.
And
Good thought.
nothing happened. But the reasoning is that women supposedly are more susceptible to concussions. And the studies, and admittedly, when the WBC spoke at the stakeholder meeting, they said that the studies are inconclusive. It could be that women are better at reporting concussions. It could be that women are actually more susceptible. It could be a number of reasons, but it is inconclusive why there are more concussions for women. It's a little bit like deeming somebody guilty rather than innocent, but, maybe they want, the idea is to be more cautious than not. And so I think one thing that we wanted to do was, obviously we have to prove that it is just as safe to do 3 minutes. Certainly the women in MMA the championship fights are 5 5-minute rounds, and here we are. So perhaps we can ask Brain Sports One to help us with the study, and we certainly have some data that we can mine to see what we can come up with. There's the argument did come up that in terms of KOs and TKOs, people do pay to see that in boxing, and maybe it becomes harder for the women to have the knockdowns and the knockouts in 2 minutes, and so they feel like they have to punch more in those 2 minutes. So it's a little bit like defeats the purpose. And so we do have CompuScore scores, and maybe we can get some of that data to see if the number of punches actually increases in the 10-round fights, the women versus the men, because they feel like they have to punch more in the 2 minutes to get that knockouts. But
that's interesting.
At the end of the day, that's 33% of the time that's taken away from them in any fight. So the other part of the equation is this pay equity. And so there were the promoters who discussed the broadcast side, and the broadcast side, doesn't broadcast as much of the female fighting, and therefore they don't get the pay. And then the broadcasters say that the promoters don't promote the women, and therefore they don't broadcast them. So it's a lot of which comes first, the chicken or the egg. So that's what we were. So I think, the challenge basically has to go out for the promoters to find the women, because they are out there, and then for the broadcasters to broadcast the fighters, and for the fighters to promote themselves, because that's really kind of what it's going to take for everybody to come together. So I think that pretty much covers.
I will say every promoter there said that the women's fights were always their best fights on the card.
Yes, this is true. This is true. And, it was really sad because, for example, I went to the Munguia fight. In the Munguia fight, I think Munguia was paid, $2 million, something like that, and we did have a WBC fight, championship fight, and the female champion was paid $30,000. And albeit that in other countries, that even though there are 2 minute rounds, the female fights are very well promoted, and they hit TV, and there doesn't seem to be a problem even with 2 minute rounds. We don't know what the purses are, but I will bet you they don't get paid $2 million, and I will bet you they don't get paid as much as the men. It will be very hard to find out what the purses are, because they don't have the LD Act. It's not as transparent, but I will bet you they don't get the high purses that the men do. So
what do you think the next step is for the gender subcommittee?
So in terms of the 2 minute rounds, I think we have enough data to mine it and to see if we do have more concussions, if we do have more punches in the 2 minute round, and then in terms of just the popularity, that's something that we probably can't do anything about. That's like I said, a challenge that has to go out to the promoters and to the managers and to the fighters themselves. But in terms of the 2 minute rounds, that's probably something we can help with.
What was the opinion that you mentioned in terms of susceptibility or risk? Were they saying that it was unclear whether or not women were at increased risk, or were they saying it was unclear as to why?
As to why.
Why? Okay.
So clearly, there were more reports of concussions, but it was unclear whether it's because women are better at reporting, whether it's because we are actually more susceptible, whether we, and the thing is, if you have women, I mean, not all the reports obviously are from combative sports. So you have women in soccer, you have women in car accidents. So if you have women fighting women, maybe the statistic will be different. It's not like you have women versus men, and especially if you have in the lower weights, right? Perhaps that statistic will be even more different. So it's hard to say what, right? So, and then if you increase the number of punches over a 2-minute period, as opposed to if you have the time to settle down, and so it's hard to say.
Right.
Right.
Okay. All right, well, if there's nothing more on the Gender Equity Subcommittee, I think we will break for lunch, and we'll come back here at 12:45.
Whoa, 45 minutes? No.
Well, you always say
It's always 20, we always say less, and it's always 45 minutes.
we always come
You
back.
have the gavel. You just do your
I
thing.
get this at home all the time. I don't need it here.
Okay.
All right, we'll target 12:30, but it'll probably be 12:45. Coming back, call the meeting back to order. We're back for December 17, 2019, California State Athletic Commission meeting. We have some unfinished business we can go back to. So I'm going to go back to agenda item number 7. And of the 4 items, one was going to be worked on during the break. So our council worked on this during the break. And so perhaps if Ken, will it be you, or Mr. Jackson, will it be you? If you could read us the change that we were seeking, the clarification that we were seeking, to see if that makes sense to the commissioners.
During the break, we made 2 proposed revisions to the language of paragraph 7 of the Bout Agreement. The first is to subdivide the paragraph into 2 subdivisions, A and B, and a minor change with respect to the beginning of the first sentence. We added, after the word commission, promoter, contestant, and manager all recognize. So we made that minor change. So it will read as follows: commission, promoter, contestant, and manager all recognize contestant as a participant in a traditionally independent occupation and sport. That's the only change to that provision.
Okay.
All right, and that will be with that change, the existing provision will be designated subdivision A, and then we've added a proposed subdivision B, which will read as follows: nothing in this section shall affect the promoter's obligations to contribute to the boxer's pension fund under Business and Professions Code sections 1880 et sec and California Code of Regulations Title IV sections 290 and 400 et sec, or contribute to any other funds regulated by the commission. Those changes or proposed changes were made to address the concerns raised during the discussion earlier this morning.
Okay. I have a motion. We accept those changes, please.
So moved.
I have a second.
Second.
A second. Any other comments, or members of the public wish to comment on this? Seeing none, call the roll.
Commissioner Araby,
Aye.
Chairman Carvelli,
Aye.
Vice Chair Layman,
Aye.
Commissioner Sauter, Commissioner Senior Quidez, Commissioner and Dr. Williams.
Aye.
6-0, sir.
Thank you all. Thank you for the work over the break, Ken and Mr. Jackson. Agenda item number 10, Executive Officers Report. Andy, you're up.
Mr. Chairman, we're going to start with the budget. As of the time that I wrote this and it came out in your packets, the commission had deposited $1,242,000. As of I'm talking to you right now, we're closer to $1,003,000. Actually, it would be over $1,003,000. We're holding a check because there was a small, but anyway, we have a close to a $50,000 check that we're having to get reissued because of a minor issue.
So we're in our second quarter for this fiscal year, correct?
Yes, sir.
Are we on track now to break more records? I mean, that seems like. That seems like
3 of the last 4 years have been record revenue years for the commission. Quite frankly, sir, I don't see us breaking last year's, but I do see us getting real close to what last year was. Under these, and look, we could. It just depends on how the second quarter comes out. The commission was buoyed by some fairly substantial fines last year. We had a substantial fine. But this is really not that much fine. This is essentially $1.3 million through the first 6 months of the year. And after this coming weekend, we're probably looking more like $1.35 million because there's some big fights this weekend, at least one big fight. So, if you just extrapolate that by 2, that'd be 2.7. Obviously, the industry don't work that way exactly. It just ebbs and flows. But
okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yes, we're budgeted for. If you turn in your sheet and you look at the budget, which is, by the way, our first budget report of the year. Through FMO3. And the commission has spent, through the first 3 months, $462,000. I don't have obviously through 6 months, it'll be the end of December, but I don't have a current one. I'm not certain that the budget office really knows what we're spending to the penny, but roughly, I can assure you we have brought in far more than we're spending. Okay, just using these numbers, if you just multiply it by 2, we're in the 900,000 expenses range. And like I told you, we've deposited. We're sitting on 1.3 million right now. So we're at about $350,000 surplus, and that's my best guess with limited budget reports.
Not including our reserves, which are
about 1.6 million.
Okay.
So adding that to it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Still isn't no fiscal report.
No, ma'am. And if you look at the top of that, this is what I think's kind of interesting. This is a projection, and I think the expenditures in the current year expenditures through the first 3 months. I hope that's right. The budget office sent it to me. They're trying with this fiscal. It is cumbersome because it affects the operations in more ways than I can say, namely through hiring decisions and these type of. I'm trying to maintain an appropriation. Now, if you look down here, we're projected a deficit in the appropriation. Okay, do you see that down there? We look like we've got a $255,761 deficit. I've requested the additional $200,000 in budget bill language. This is sort of the catch-22 with the commission. We run a lot of fights. Well, fights cost money to regulate, so you're going to have more expenses. Well, we're revenue positive on the money that we're bringing in, but looks like I'm working on it. It'd be more helpful if I had budget reports that would show me what I would spend, and that way I wouldn't over-test and drug test in order, or I could. There's things that I can do, but I use them budget.
You have your budget change proposals in.
Yes, sir.
And they make sense, and so expecting that we will?
I'm hopeful, and on January 10th we'll know. The truth of the matter is we probably won't have this issue if those were to be approved. We probably won't have this issue moving forward because the appropriation I've requested a substantial increase in appropriation, and the legislature granted us those two positions from the sunset bill that we successfully, the commission successfully, and the legislature and the governor signed. So those two positions are created in statute, and I'll get to that in my staffing report, but it might as well just talk about that right now because it affects the budget. Ken and I are working to try to get a meeting with the executive officer of the State Personnel Board. We've talked to her deputy. Was that their deputy?
That's correct. We've talked with the deputy and acting executive officer, and we've made our position clear, and we're awaiting the return of the executive officer from a leave to go forward with the proposal.
Let me explain what that means is we've got the positions. They're in statute. Now what I need for Cal HR or SPB, and Cal HR told us to go see SPB, so State Personnel Board, so that's where we're at now. I need to go to one of their meetings, get on the agenda, and for them to say, yes, the commission, we see that the legislature's done this. These positions are now redone in state service. You can post these or whatever, reestablished. Because I'll have to go through the process of posting. It's unusual, not unheard of, it's unusual to put civil service positions in statute. It's exactly what happened this time. They're unique positions. So now I've got to go back through one more process, even though the legislature put it in law, to get this essentially stamped that this is good. That's where I'm at with that. Having said all that, it affects the budget for next year should those BCPs be approved.
Question, you said the person you have to go to is on leave? For how long? Is there an acting?
She's back now, I think. Is she back?
My understanding is that she returned and then she went out on a different leave. And so as of 10 days ago, I did speak with the acting executive officer, and they certainly know our position on this. I expect to be able to make a report at the next commission meeting that, well, we made some substantial progress in getting these classifications reestablished, since it is provided for by statute.
And these are health and safety things. We need these people to, staff and regulate.
Right.
I have a question.
Correct. So,
Commissioner Credence?
Were you done with the budget?
yes, I mean, if you...
How did we get to the increase in the administration pro rata? Did they just tell us again how much they're increasing, or did we have something to say about it?
No, ma'am. Ma'am, I didn't have anything to say about it. But if you'll notice that they did decrease the OIS, Office of Information Services pro rata. And if you'll notice, all of the pro ratas, I can read. We were paying less this year than we did last year in pro rata, even with the increase in the admin.
Remind me again what is the communications pro rata versus the communication expense?
The communication pro rata is like for the press office, for like public affairs. The communication budget that we have, it's the telephone in the office, and like we have to pay our phone bill. That's what that costs. So the departmental services, these are things, the pro ratas, OIS, that's for the computers, obviously, the network. administration, that's for like the executive office and the budget office and the attorney's office and that type of thing.
Can we shave them on the budget office since they're not actually providing a budget?
Shaving. Shaving.
Years. You're so good. Well, I mean, we haven't had I mean, I know they're trying, but we actually haven't had a budget for 2 years. So, you know, if this is real world, I'm just saying, can we talk about it?
Well, I know that I know that they're trying.
But, you know, that trying doesn't really, you know, we don't pay for trying. I mean, you know, if you like, I'm just saying, can we ask? Is that, you know, if somebody comes in and they try to work, but they don't actually work, then you ask for a discount.
That's true. Notice the department did go down, and, you know, we have a new director at the department, Kim Kirkmeyer. She's been appointed as the new director.
$168,000. I mean, that's our largest line item, and the budget is a huge issue. And we've been waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, working on 3 years with no, I mean, that's a big problem.
Martha, what is your ask, if I may ask?
That we go in there and ask them,
Who's we?
you.
I don't have any questions on it. I think this is a necessary expense. I don't have any questions on it, so that's my individual
There
opinion.
has to be something that, I mean, if we spent our own money and actually, we would be able to do a budget instead of going through a system that, I mean, Andy needs a budget. He actually needs to know how much money we can spend on certain things. He's been saying that for a couple of years now. And if we did our own, if we started doing our own, but we need the ability to spend the money to do our own. We're still waiting. It's
Okay.
reasonable. I'm just saying.
I understand. I don't have no one has an answer for you, though, so you know this.
Can we ask?
Sure, we can ask. Andy, I will call you, and we will ask for a call, and we'll ask some more questions. So we can
Okay.
get some
And then,
further updates from Fiscal.
No, this is to the contractor.
okay.
Okay?
All right,
False
thank you, sir.
Claims Act, there's-
And then,
All right, come on, please.
next in my, I just have an update on the pension programs,
As far as
value over time. Stock market's been good this year.
it's so.
Yeah. So even though we've been taking money out of the fund, we're still up there right at $5 million, even though we've been taking money out to pay retired boxers. So that's in your report. Is there any questions on the Raymond James statement? No? Okay, the next one, and this was another one that I specifically asked DCA, and I feel like they've came through and helped me some on. I didn't want to come to this meeting with that examination of boxer applicants with the same thing I've had from last time. Ken, do you know where a little bit better on that?
Yeah, I'm told that it's in review at the executive level, and I'm assured that the matter will go to agency by December 31st.
Okay. There you go.
So moving from DCA executive level to the agency level by December 31st.
This has been going on since 2017, you realize that, right? And last time you said that there was nothing that we were doing wrong. And that we had this streamlined thing.
So we have a date, though.
December 31st.
December
31st.
31st to agency is what I'm told.
First two agencies.
And then it
On
sits
the
at
record.
agency for a while.
It's usually quicker there.
Yeah.
They turn it around fairly quick.
I think once it goes there, it'll be.
Don't hold.
I know I don't have to rehash your own package to you.
Please don't rehash. We're
Okay.
going over the same ground over and over again. Just keep pushing, please.
delegated entities. JT still is here, even though I told him he didn't have to come, but he chose to come.
Gotta love Sacramento. Hello, JT.
We have nobody.
So before you start speaking, sir, I think this was Commissioner Layman's idea. We think that, our delegated entities are giving good reports, and they're being diligent, and they're showing up. And perhaps we'll give them the option to send reports out of the 5 meetings. You have to attend at least one in person. And you can send reports to the other. And, maybe don't come to the meeting where you have to travel, right? Go to the easier ones. If you miss reports, then you're all coming back. So don't miss, and then you're fine. So anyway, that was a message to all of our
Thanks.
delegates.
I don't think I've missed one of these meetings for about 15 years.
I wasn't talking to you directly. I was really talking to Steve.
But I'm happy not to take up time. Gave you a brief report. Obviously, we're into the slow time of the year. Time to work on projects, get caught up on things. But we had some things that were kind of neat that I thought I'd report on just briefly. One of our CAMO alumni, Dominic Reyes, is challenging John Jones for his light heavyweight title. This commission's very familiar with John Jones, and Dominic Reyes is one of our own from California, and so we're excited to see Dominic Reyes in his performance.
How did that fight end up in Houston, for heaven's sake?
I don't know. I was hoping we'd see it here.
Yeah.
So that was a lot of fun. I thought it was also worthy to note, we've been seeing a trend in athletes in general competing longer and later in life. We're seeing a lot of amateur mixed martial artists that are 40 years and older. It gets very difficult to match make people the larger in age spans that we have. It's harder to gauge experience and ring time and those type of things so we're going to give it a try and make a division for a master's division for our athletes that are a little bit older, and we're going to give that a try and see if that is a better fit for those athletes. Perhaps it'll engender more athletes participating, but at the very least, I think as far as a matchmaking protocol, it'll help us. So if you have any questions on that, let me know. I'd also like to let you know November 9th was an important date for the CAMO organization. November 9th, 2009 was the first regulated amateur MMA event in California. So CAMO's completed a decade working with the California State Athletic Commission. And I just wanted to sincerely thank this commission for being our partners and working with us for so long. And I want to sincerely thank you from all of our stakeholders for allowing amateur MMA and leading out in amateur MMA as long as you have. So thank you very much.
What did you say?
We should have had cake.
We should have had cake.
10 years. It's been a good run. We've enjoyed it.
Well, so then it's very auspicious that this year, on your 10th anniversary, you regulated the first fully regulated amateur MMA event in China.
I didn't connect those dots, but you're absolutely right. And that was a really rewarding experience. There are certain moments and certain things that feel really good when we reach out and in our sport, and that felt really good. It really was very similar to a throwback from 2009. But I think our regulation was even better. We regulated in China and drug tested all the athletes. Now, I will tell you this. In China, not one of those athletes tested hot. Those were the cleanest drug tests I've ever seen in my life. So it's definitely some cultural differences, but it was a pleasure to be there and to share the things that we've learned in California to try to advance the sport there. It was great. So that was an honor.
Good to know. While we hear that the Russians are banned from all sports.
I saw those headlines.
There has to be some way for you to publicize your athletes at the elite level, though, because you have athletes in Bellator, you have athletes in UFC, you have athletes in combates, and
How about a press release office?
I'd love to have a press release office. We've got our social media up. We've been fairly active on those. We're going to continue to push out a lot of these stories. I think as we get closer to this big fight, this championship fight, I think that's going to be good. But good point. These are big stories, and they need to be told.
And we have USA boxing ones too, so. But we should do that, like highlight from our delegated entities.
Yeah, because it's not just a camo fighter. He not only did he fight in camo, but he also fought through the local fights here and out. So he is definitely our mutual. He is our home product.
From the farm league.
maybe we could get one of the reporters to do a story on him.
But yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Sir, USA Boxing is next. They obviously didn't show up today, as you allowed them. And their reports are due on a quarterly, a quarterly basis, so we'll have an updated report from them next time. Obviously, if you've read this report's just kind of a rehash, an old report. So we'll have a new report on their quarterly schedule at the next meeting.
So this report is from February of 2019, and as much as I appreciate Mike and what he's doing and the fact that they have the Olympics coming up next year, he's been sort of putting off really providing an actual report and putting off giving us actual numbers for quite a while. And I've been actually telling him that I really want to see numbers that match, right? And then at the last meeting, he said he was meeting with the LBCs in November and talking to them about actual financials. And that happens every meeting. So I'm getting really frustrated with this because none of these numbers have matched for, I don't know, ever. So I would really like to maybe have a sit down with them. I mean, they did provide a bunch of financials, and I can't make heads or tails out of them, and I can actually read financials. So I don't know what to do with this. Their nonprofit, their benefits are outrageously expensive. I don't know how anybody can throw a benefit like that, and he says it's because they include other things. I've talked to the LBCs. They claim that they don't, I don't know. I don't know who's saying, so I can't make the numbers match. I don't know what to do with this. Suggestions?
I talked to Joe Zanders because I was more concerned, I don't want to say more concerned, but I had a concern, if you remember at the last commission meeting, how the largest LBC in the country was losing money. I wanted to figure out how is that happening? How can you have this much revenue on a nonprofit organization? You'd be losing money. So Joe and I kind of talked through it a little bit. I'd like to start by sitting down with maybe Joe Zanders or having a meeting with him, because if we can make LA, the Los Angeles area, that LBC, not discounting the others in California, but that's the biggest one in the country, because the others are making money. If we can get that one back up, and there has to be something. There's something just not that just seems odd that one's losing money.
I mean, look at this one. Their revenue was $10,000, and their expenses were $15,450, which, most of it was in fees. That's insane to me.
They were saying that these were at their events. They would get in kind, where they're just that the revenue is not on the books essentially.
Obviously obviously it is on the books because they reported it. This is Southern California.
Oh, but there's other revenue.
So I don't, yeah. Yeah, I'll sit down with you, Andy, and talk. I mean, I've known Joe for 30 years. I'll sit down with you and meet with him.
I mean, my thoughts were if we can just make this easier for the amateur boxing to have an opportunity to compete. And the initial thought that I had, what we've been just a blockbuster success with the camo program, is when Chairman Carvelli was first appointed, I said, listen, we need more pro-ams. We need more pro-ams. And he sit down with Jeremy Lappin and with JT, and we got that deal worked out. It's just been I think it's been,
Martha.
Hey, Martha, it's been really, really positive. There's many MMA shows that we go to now where camo's first. And if we can do something, because we have so much professional boxing, and the ring's already set up. If there's something that we can do where if the ring's already set up.
How about a meeting in the new year? We've gone over this and over this, guys. How about a meeting in the new year with the officials, as many as you can get together, and invite everyone here. If it has to be a public meeting, then so do so. Let's have a conversation.
Sure.
Over some pizza or something like that. And, don't yell at them and scream at them and give them directives and stuff, Martha. But invite them in for a discussion meeting, and we'll keep pushing to, right? Otherwise, we don't need to keep going over the same thing. This is not Bill Murray and Groundhog Day, is it? Okay, thank you. Okay, USFL?
USFL, John Frank and I have been working on, he's proposed a few minor rule changes. We're not there yet, but we're working on them together. So that's my update from him, other than his things in the packet. He's got his proposals. You can read them.
Looks good.
Yep.
At an all-female event, see that?
Yep.
Pretty cool.
Mr. Fossum with this.
Steve is here.
Steve is here.
Good afternoon, everybody. Happy holidays or Merry Christmas, whatever you like to hear as far as that goes. Had a really good year this year.
Steve Fossum with IKF.
I'm sorry, Steve Fossum with
Okay.
IKF. Had a really good year this year. We finished with 52 events for 2019. Had Dan Still, one of our chief officials, or our chief officials, implemented a really good training program for all of our officials. In fact, it's probably one of the most dynamic ones I've seen worldwide within any of our organizations. Very detailed, and we created a lot of officials from that program. In total, since we took over the delegation for amateur kickboxing and Muay Thai, which was March 17th, 2014, we just completed our 277th event.
Wow.
So we've been pretty busy and keeping things going, and had a lot of positives and learned from the negatives, of course, like hopefully we all do. And short and sweet and to the end. The only thing I wanted to bring a note up, which I was trying to remember the lady's name that we saw on KCRA 3 here locally last night. It was an amateur boxer who, I believe, if I got this correctly, she's a local prospect out of Sacramento, junior girl, around 14, 15, something like that, maybe even 16, and she won a spot on the USA boxing team. So can't remember what her name was, but I thought it was pretty big news when I saw it, so I thought I'd bring that up for kudos to her.
Cool.
Good. Report looks good, very clear. Any questions, commissioners?
What are your plans for next year? How are you going to make IKF better?
Well, we are in the works right now for the second year in a row trying to organize a West Coast tournament like we do our World Classic back in Orlando. And we had it scheduled for this year, but it turned out that the two location venues that we had, one of our promoters had an event booked at those two locations, and the dates didn't work out, and we didn't want to step on our promoter's toes, so we ended up canceling the first one, and when it happened the second time, we canceled the second one and just kind of looked for 2020. So, but hopefully that looks like it's going to happen. We're working on a couple different venues, couple different dates, so hopefully by the first meeting of next year I'll be able to announce that. So, yeah.
Great.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Appreciate your efforts.
Thank you.
Andy, C3 Logic?
Yep.
Anything?
Just quickly, we've done 1,643 tests since we began the thing as of, began the program as of December 6th. Not all of these obviously are baseline. Some of these are follow-ups. So, Dr. Williams, we looked at some of them at the last MAC. We followed up. Yep. And then, sir, I've already kind of covered the staffing update when I
Right,
told
you
you.
did.
Okay.
Good, thank you.
And then just on the upcoming event schedule, I invite the commissioners. We have a nice Bellator, Cyborgs fighting Julia Budd on January 25th at the Forum. And we have a significant event on at the Honda Center on Valentine's Day, February 14th.
Or my wife
It's not
loves
on there. You can't tell us what is a significant event.
No, ma'am.
What a tease.
Right.
Wow.
Andy's coming out of retirement. Big announcement.
Sponsored by Chick-fil-A.
Don't fight on Sunday. Okay. Thank you, sir. Agenda item number 11, Business and Professions Code Section 18640.5 requires commission to invite stakeholder testimony in commission meetings in order to identify actions that may lead to greater opportunities for licensees to participate in major professional boxing contests. I found my mumbles is gone. Thank you. Anyone like to comment, members of the public or commissioners, on any other ideas on how to make more professional events other than see if you can get KSI and Logan Paul or his brother to fight again? Seeing none, we'll move on to public items, or public comment on items not on the agenda. Okay, seeing no one standing up for that, this commission now will go into closed session. We'll ask all of you to please leave the room, and we will let you know when you can come back. That means all of you. Derek?
Do 13 first, sir.
We are back from closed session. We're reopened. That's the agenda for today, folks. To the rest of the staff, Sophie, Tricia, and everyone, Derek, and those that were here and then left, and our delegates, we thank you for a great year. It really was a great year. We're really proud of that. Bless you. And we have more work to do, and so we're looking forward to continually working with you all. And we wish you safe and happy holidays. And with that, we are done. Thank you.
Who was?